Hey, I wanted to make a video about the latest progress on the build here. We actually did finish up the boiler system and we'll go over that, but what we wanted to go over in this video is the rough electrical wiring. So we went ahead and ran all the main rough wiring for the entire house. There was a lot to cover here, a lot of bedrooms, bathrooms, a lot of things to think about as far as lighting placement, switches, all that. There's really no right or wrong way to do it. Obviously you have to at a minimum follow code, but you do want to really just walk through the house and really get a feel for where you want things to be placed. You could have an architect lay out everything on a set of plans for you. That is great for a starting point, but you really, if it's your own home and you have the choice, don't just follow the plan exactly. Again, I'll reiterate that you do have to follow code and at least have lighting in the minimum places required and whatnot and receptacles. But if you want an additional switch or a three-way switch somewhere or a light that, once you step and walk through the room, maybe you'll start figuring out where you really want your recessed lighting in the ceiling and whatnot. So we went ahead and did that. We took a few days while we were wiring to just go ahead and add some extra things like that. So some of it's basic. We did include things like a receptacle. This is the master bathroom, so we put a receptacle next to the toilet so that we could either put a bidet with a heated element in it for warm water. Let's see here. We went ahead, like I said, and did thought through all the lighting. So one thing you can do that we kind of did here is if you really can't decide exactly how you want the lighting, the nice thing is all of the new LED lighting are no longer using can fixtures that are then sort of, while they're wired immediately when you're doing the wiring and then later you screw the bulb. And now everything is basically small pancake thin LED lights that just pop into the drywall. So all you're required to do is leave a whip right here. So if I ended up later wanting to add another, say, light over here, which is actually what we're going to do, I could always just wire the first one and run a jumper over to the next one later on, right up through the drywall and snake it through. So it's not the end of the world if you forget something. On this house specifically, I might as well mention that since we are using attic trusses, which basically, if you look here, have open bays up there. So there's an entire open space up there. But what that ends up doing is giving you these wings up here. It's hard to tell, but you'll have these open wings. Now this will all get drywalled underneath, but upstairs you'll always have access to an entire wing where all your plumbing and electrical can be ran. That's what we did here. The good thing about that is if I ever want to snake a wire anywhere, I just go up to the attic, run it from the electrical panel back down these sides, and I could pop anything through. That goes not only just electrical, but any plumbing, any ducting. So really wise decision if you're planning your own house to use attic trusses and design it that way. But that's sort of a side note. So again, a few little extras I had thought about, and these are just things to sort of think about if you're doing your own electrical layout is, where you want maybe even future switches or future lights. So what I did here was I couldn't decide whether we wanted soffit lights, floodlights. So I just went ahead and you can see all my notes here of where everything goes. But I did a hallway light right here, which will control this light. And there's actually a three-way switch down there, which is this blue wire now, which is a 3-wire that allows you to use 2 switches to control one set of lights. But what I did was I added some spares here. So I added a spare for a soffit and a flood. Now, since I don't know where they're going to go or where to end up wiring it, what I did was just wire them up. I provided power for it from the panel into this box, but then I ran those wires up to a junction box right here. Now that junction box I'll be able to access later, like I said, in these attic truss wings from up above. So once I decide what I want to do, whether it's soffit lights or a floodlight somewhere on the front of the garage or the side of the house, I can just tap off of that. And when everything's drywalled, I don't have to try and fish a wire in later. I did the same thing over here, which the spray foam guys covered my box quite a bit. My fault, should have had a cover on it. However, that's going to be my box to feed into the garage for all my circuits, all the receptacles, all the switches. So I sort of did the same thing here with the switch box. These are just spares. I could have just one switch to turn on everything in the garage, but I just put a couple extra in case I wanted to turn on additional lights or whatnot. Another thing I had to think about was our pantry is actually sort of a second kitchen, if you will. We're going to have big cabinets right here range hood, a cooktop. Right here's an island with a sink in it. And in the pantry, we're going to be having the refrigerator over here. So I had to wire the receptacle for the refrigerator on its own circuit. And then we're also going to have cabinets in here with a range oven in the pantry, a sink with a garbage disposal. So a kitchen requires two 20 amp circuits. Even if you just have one outlet, it requires two circuits. So in this case we have, and that's just a code rule. So we have two outlets on one circuit here, two outlets on the next circuit here. And because my pantry is kind of doubling as the kitchen, and I'm doing the wiring, it's my home, I figured I'd overkill it, and I actually ran an additional two circuits in here. So I have 4 kitchen circuits, which seems kind of crazy, but you got to think about things like during holiday parties or whatever, you might have a crock pot and the microwave going and maybe another blender going. So you got to think when all those devices are plugged in, going, and the oven's on and all that, you really need to have those circuits so they're not overloaded. Not only, yes, the breaker will trip, but the point is to not have to worry about those things, to overkill it. And that's why the minimum code is 2 circuits for the kitchen to begin with, because they know you're going to be plugging in high current devices possibly. So the extra sort of things I added, like I was speaking about before, was I am going to have a little slop sink here, or not a slop sink, a little bar sink, just to be able to do some prepping and cutting some veggies and whatnot and throwing the scraps. And I figured, well, why don't I obviously just put an additional garbage disposal underneath this cabinet so that way I don't have to pick all that stuff out of there. So I went ahead and wired an extra box there. I did some receptacles here. So then you have to think about your range hood. That's another thing you should plan ahead for. So don't forget, you might frame this whole thing, go to install it, and you forgot to run a circuit for there. Now again, in this case, I wouldn't be in a bad spot because I could get to all this above. So I could just drop a circuit from the panel right over there. Another thing is we didn't really know exactly where our dining table, we're just going to put like a big long dining room table here. And we didn't know exactly where it would fall. So I didn't want to put a light in the ceiling and then, oh man, it's a foot off. So, or the wire's in the wrong joist bay here. So what I did again was just run a junction box. I ran a feed to a switch here up to the junction box, and that way I can just fish my wire later wherever it needs to go once we figure out the placement of the table. Yeah, that's it. Think about TV mounts. So what I'm actually doing in this case is I have to figure out what size TV we're getting, get the TV mount, and then I'm going to fish a new wire up for the TV on its own circuit because I don't want to put it in the wrong spot again. So again, just things to think about, all those extras, TVs, garbage disposals, range hoods, spare circuits. Over here's more spare circuits for the back of the house. So again, I kind of overkilled it, but it's a lot easier doing a little more labor up front. There's a junction box for that. Than having to add it later. And just keep in mind, by code, any junction box you put in there or place anywhere, you have to be able to access it later. You can't put it behind a wall that's going to be enclosed or drywalled because obviously you have loose connections in there. So just keep that in mind as well. Just a last note, I'll show you the panel details of what I did. So what I ended up doing is actually just drilling 3 large access holes for these wires to come through that'll later be filled with some fire blocking foam. But what I did was separate my high current wiring on the left here, all my lighting circuits in the middle, and all my larger 20 amp, mostly receptacle circuits on the right. Now, you're not required to do that, but it does make it really nice and neat and clean. And things like this are when the inspector comes to take a look at everything, you know, he'll see that and think to himself, okay, this isn't just a weekend warrior. And even if you are, I mean, just keep your work really neat and clean and, you know, they won't start questioning your abilities and stuff. So taking these little extra steps, you know, it makes you feel good at the end that everything looks nice, but it definitely just tidies everything up and makes it look like a pro. So if you got any questions about, you know, certain codes or whatnot or things, just let me know. Don't be afraid to research on your own. Just make sure you're looking at the latest code requirements. And if you got questions or just don't know, just ask. I mean, even call an inspector. It's not, you know, depending on where you're from, You don't necessarily need to be a licensed electrician. It just all depends on your location and local requirements. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask. Call your local inspector and even ask him what he's, allow if you have a specific question about something that might be odd. Not everything is straightforward. You're going to run into situations where you're questioning can you run a wire here? Can you do this? So like I said, don't be afraid to ask. That's how you learn. And with that said, we'll see you guys on the next one.